First of all, I want to thank Kendall Hunt for allowing us to do this and work with us on the book. But I definitely want to thank Ryan Brown and Bethany Slats because they've been kind of the point people of setting up this webinar and also working with us in the book. And it's a lot of work that goes untold. So thank you very much for this opportunity for being here today. And so got a slideshow, kind of talk a little bit about what's going on, kind of how the book ties into it to a certain degree, but really focus on why it's important in the classroom, why academic debate and argumentation is something that is critically needed right now. Unfortunately, my co-editor, Katelyn Brooks, is a PhD student at Purdue and is teaching right now. I would assume that there's a good number of folks in this audience who are also teachers with PhDs or graduate degrees. And so you probably understand the pain and suffering that Kat is going through right now. So hopefully she'll be able to join us towards the end of the meeting as we move forward. And Kat was a graduate student at Utah when we started this, but before she was a debater on the MTSU debate team and a comm studies major as well. I am the director of forensics and debate, basically a really fancy term for debate coach at Middle Tennessee State University. I'm an associate professor. I'm also the secretary of the IPDA organization, the national organization. And I've been doing this for quite some time now. And so this is an important topic to me. So as Ryan said, I'll be glad to answer any questions at the end, but let me get going. All right. So what we've experienced in the classroom, first, chaos. And I don't need to go into a lot of detail with this. I think we're pretty familiar with the concept of COVID, where we are with that. That's disrupted it. We've had two very contentious presidential elections. And if you think realistically about that, that's going to be the majority of our students' cognitive lifespan. Like you're talking that these presidential debates go back to when they were in middle school. And so that's what they're going to remember. That's what they're going to know. And that's what they think that civil discourse is. And so they bring that to the classroom. I mean, they bring what they know with them, and we see it. We see that they don't know how to argue. They don't know how to be civil with one another. And it's a major problem. And it's very difficult to get them involved in speaking. And when they do, it's often confrontational. They've been raised with this mindset that I'm right and the other side is the enemy. And that's not how a good democracy works. That's not how a good civilization works. You can't progress when you're at these opposite poles and there's no room for maneuvering or no room for compromise in the middle. And so that's some of the things we look at. And then we move to just the idea of information itself. We can see that in the United States that politically, academia is considered a hostile place in many areas. And part of that is based on the principle that they don't trust what's happening in the universities. They don't trust information. And so part of our jobs as educators is to educate on a subject, but also to educate about how to discuss topics, why education is important, why we need to find good information, because they've been raised in an environment where everything is fake news. If it's not what you believe, it's not your parents' opinion or someone that you trust's opinion, then it's fake news. And those of us who are in academia know that that's just not true. And so trying to find a path forward without isolating and alienating your audience is a difficult task. And so this book that we put together, while up front it is for a debate format, it actually has some real world practical applications to it. And that's one thing about the IPDA debate format, the International Public Debate format, is that it is heavily focused on the concept of public. The idea that argumentation should be designed for lay use, for the average person to use. And so that's why I think this is a great tool to use in the classroom. If you're teaching a debate class, obviously, an argumentation class, very helpful, but anything, honestly, because you can take these skills and use them in a civics class, an English class. because it's not about being right, it's about the art of persuasion, as Aristotle would say. And so what we've done is we've taken theories and shown practical uses for them. And why is that important? It's important because it gives our students some concrete knowledge that what we say, what we do, what we argue isn't just based upon our own opinions, but there's some reasoning and logic behind it. And that's super important for our students to understand, because often this is the first time they've been experienced or exposed to such things. So helping students understand new perspectives is critical. I mean, that's kind of one of the big purposes of college, is to show them the world beyond what they've kind of been isolated to, and to show new perspectives, new peoples, new ideas. And naturally, there's going to be pushback, but that's what we do. That's our job within our own fields. Every field, it exists to progress and move forward. And so we look for tools that help and aid in that, because it's going to be a tough sell. And so we look at old school stuff. We use classic theories like Aristotle, ethos, which is credibility of the speaker, pathos, the emotional appeal of the speaker, and logos, what logic the speaker uses. But we also use more modern theories that are important for people to understand as well. I have the example of Walter Fisher. Walter Fisher is a storyteller. He thinks humans form of communication is through story and narrative. And there's a lot of backing to that. And so we give the multiple tools to do this. We talk about stock issues. So if you're going to run an argument, what is important to look for in an argument? Is there a need for a change? Are we arguing just to argue, or is there really a need out there to do it? Can we do it? Just simply, is there an agent, an organization that's capable of doing what you want to do? It's very easy to say, I want world peace. It's very, very difficult to find a plan to move that forward, or find an agent that's going to be fair and move forward. And so students have to think about that and really work through that. Good ideas have to also be practical ideas. And so we model that. And students really need that, because one of the largest, or one of the biggest problems you have with argumentation is that without parameters, it's a free-for-all. And argumentation should be something that is limited and focused so that you can tackle one issue at a time. It helps keep the argument on track. It helps keep those involved on track. It helps take emotion and put it appropriately. And right now we don't have that. And one of the things the book helps us do is kind of zero that in and show you, if you're talking about a subject, then you need to stay on topic, because if not, you're non-topical. You're arguing about something else. You have to separate the issues at hand. And we do this through some activities as well, because we've learned, the statistics have shown us pretty clearly that students learn best by doing. So at the end of the day, not only are we asking students to learn theories and we're telling them how to do it, but we actually want to see it in action. And that's where the debate community comes in and is helpful. And I say this as someone who practices what he preaches. I teach an argumentation class, and we have a program at Middle Tennessee where it's called experiential learning. Most universities and colleges have something similar, learning outside the classroom, something along those lines. And the purpose is to get the students to use it. And so what I do in my argumentation and debate class, which is predominantly non-debaters, predominantly just graduate or not undergraduate students in comm studies and other fields, is I have them go to a collegiate debate tournament in the format and use what they've learned in the semester. And they do quite well, because there's kind of this aura of this big bad debate world that can't be touched. But the reality is, in public debate, the focus is on argumentation and audience analysis. And the students learn the theories, they learn how to apply them, and they do quite well. And it's not because they're learning the game and they learn the tricks and techniques, but they use good argumentation. They call a fallacy out when they hear one. And so like the fake news scavenger hunt is a great tool to get students set up for that. You have to go through the news, and you've got to find areas where the news is not necessarily factual. And using the word fake is difficult because it's not about what's real and what's not, but what about what can be backed up? And can you find multiple sources to show what your argument is saying? Or can you show multiple non-biased sources? And that's why this is important. This is something that happens in the real world. Because in the IPDA debate format, the judges are lay, they're not trained, they're not professional. And so one round, a debater or a student may have someone like me who's been doing this 30 years. The next round may be a fellow student or a parent, or just somebody that needed some to do on a Saturday afternoon. And you have to be able to convince all of those. And that's the real world. The real world isn't these very trained, finite experts, but just average folks. And so how do we persuade them? All right. And it's important because it does help in the classroom, but the goal is to take it to the real world, beyond the classroom. The classroom is just an experiment, kind of a sheltered, safe space to get you prepared for the real world. And so getting them used to the idea that they could be on either side of a topic, that they may have to argue a topic that they don't necessarily like, but that's the position they're in and they have to work through it. My original debate coach in Louisiana, Ben Estrange, who wrote the first chapter before he passed away, had a saying that he would say first day of class, which is no pancake is so flat that it has one side. And so there's always the other side. So teaching students that you've got to be able to know both sides of an argument. It also teaches empathy, i.e., why does your opponent, the other side, feel the way they do? Why do they have the passion to defend that? If you don't understand that, then you're just two folks yelling at each other. And so debate and argumentation in a structured manner helps you learn the other side. And it's really beneficial for students to do that because often they come into college with that very me-centric world. Like, I'm the center of the universe. How does everything affect me? And the reality is we are a herd animal. We're part of a culture, a civilization, a society, whichever term you want to use, but we have to work together to move forward. And so this is helpful to do that. And I'm going to go through this one pretty quick. I mean, it gives us good type of activities and whatnot and explanations for the format of IPDA debate. But the real focus of this webinar is outside of debate itself and more about the classroom and students. And what's the nice thing about IPDA is you can take these formats and transform them into the classroom very, very easily. And this is what we're looking for. This is this ultimate goal. Good speaking skills. Just the ability to overcome your public speaking apprehension, the ability to speak about something that may be controversial or something that's uncomfortable, and you get up in front of a group of people and you're willing to explain it. And that just takes practice, but that structure again helps you with the practice. The center one is critical. We can't beat this into our students enough. The idea of the audience is what matters. The audience is going to be who you're persuading. And that could be a group of people, but quite often that audience is your boss. And you're trying to persuade your boss to give you a raise or give you resources or something as crazy as better work environment. And so you've got to understand who your audience is. How do they work? And what does your audience want as well? I.e., what is the judge, we've used that word parentheses, looking for? And as you're practicing your argumentation skills, you've got to learn to start to figure those kind of things out. And so the book talks about different kinds of audiences, different approaches to it. And then finally, the thing that we wish we could just rubber stamp in the students, the idea of critical thinking. The idea that your thoughts aren't the only thoughts, that there are multiple ways of looking at things. And to be able to be creative yet fair. Think outside the box, but within reason. And it's a tough thing for students to deal with. We understand this, but we also see them excel and succeed in life once they figure it out and once they get good at critical thinking. And that's what I tell my students coming into college. We don't want you in college because you're smart or an average intelligent person who can do pre-existing tasks. You're here because you're the future. You get to fix the problems my generation made and the generation before me made, and to make the world a better place. And so you've got to be able to think in a different way. If you think the same way, you'll get the same results. And so that's a big part of this process, and to do so in a manner that's civil, where you can work with others, talk with others, have discussions that don't lead to either quiet or people yelling at each other. And I think that's difficult. All right, so I don't have my clock in front of me, and so I have no idea how long I've been going or how much time I've used. I think I moved through it pretty quick, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, that's
do you
great.
know, Ryan, how much I got?
Yeah, we have about 15 minutes left, and
Okay.
we do have questions popping in. I encourage everybody to keep sending those in.
So let me sum up real quick, and then I will be glad to answer any questions. Like I said, hopefully Kat comes in. So in summary, basically the work and what I promote as a teacher, as a scholar, as a professor, is the ability to use skills well in the future. And the book was designed in that manner. It was designed to be cost effective, and it was designed to have practical approaches. There are other debate and argumentation textbooks out there that are heavy and thick in theory, and I don't have anything against them, but Kendall Hunt allowed us to fill a niche. And that niche was to find something that's practical and useful and quick for educators to use to work with students. And this book really does that. And it has a host of authors that help us in that direction, and folks who have been doing this for a very long time. Because we all believe in this. We believe in the concept of a better society and moving forward, and our students are key to this. And so thank you for coming again. Thank you for Kendall Hunt. And let me jump on some questions and see if I can get to the top of those.
I can start reading them to you. I have a couple already here.
The title of the book, I think you already got that one. So go ahead and shoot them to me, Ryan.
Yeah, could you explain the logical fallacy bingo?
Okay, so what the fallacy logic bingo is it's got a set of fallacies. So like, let's say an ad hominem attack to the person. You've got to find one. And once you find an example of that, then you get to strike that off. And so like ad hominems are super easy. The bandwagon fallacy is super easy, but there are some difficult ones that you have to think about, like appeal to tradition, one that you don't normally think of, but it is a fallacy. And so it makes the students research. And that's the important side of that, is they go out there, they look at the world in which they live in, the advertising that kind of saturates them, and the arguments that saturates them, and look for bad logic. Honestly, I think students love fallacies because we're just inundated with them.
Slippery slope, that sort of thing.
Yep. Straw man. As a graduate student working on my PhD, I had to learn, I think, 55 of them in Latin. I'm glad that I don't have to do that, and I will never make my students do that. But the concept of fallacies is still super important.
What are some debate topics that the publication includes?
So they can go from your standard topics of like politics, obviously. We're at midterm elections. We got a presidential election coming up sooner than we want to admit. So kind of your typical, what you would think are debate and argumentation topics. But we also will focus on quotes because it's important to work through quotes, or pop culture because it is important. One of my favorite topics is Star Wars is better than Star Trek. And at first you're thinking, well, that's kind of silly, but the reality is you take a step back and you're like, okay, what is Star Wars about? What's the goal? What's the central theme of Star Wars versus Star Trek? And so you can have these deeper, more philosophical debates about important issues that on the surface may not seem important. And so there's a lot of leeway. There are topics about sports, obviously about like international affairs, things of that nature. So pretty broad, because we know the reality is that most of us aren't going to grow up be public analysts or lawyers. A lot of lawyers, but not everybody. And so you've got to have that ability to be flexible. And even a good lawyer knows their audience.
Sure. And kind of piggybacking off that, you had mentioned it briefly during your audience analysis portion, but explain the impact of debate on students obtaining jobs after graduation.
I didn't catch that last part.
What could you explain the benefits of debate to students obtaining jobs after graduation?
The first benefit is kind of the one I mentioned, which is you don't know who your boss is and what they do and don't like. And that's something you got to figure out real fast. But also, no matter what job you have in life, there's going to be elements of persuasion to it. And so those who are good at it and can empathize are going to be more successful in the real world. They're going to understand what their customers want. They're going to understand what their bosses want, what the company wants. Oftentimes, we don't think that deep about where we work, but there's usually a company set of values. And so students who are able to think through that initial kind of fascia and get into the deeper meaning of it are going to be more successful. If you're a boss or a supervisor and you've got some unruly employees, you've got to figure out why they're unruly. Are they unhappy because of the job? Are they having family issues? What's going on? Beyond the fact that you just want to kind of knee-jerk say they're not good employees, because you've got to manage folks.
That's super helpful. Question, how can someone join the IPDA?
The IPDA webpage is pretty easy. It's ipdadebate.info. And at the bottom of this slide is my email and Kat's email. And so you can email either of us as well. Really easy to get a hold of, really good people in it. And if you're in academic debate, that's cool. But you don't have to be in academic debate. You can do this in your classroom. Like I said, we do it in our classroom. Now I do the EXL, but we also have an in-classroom tournament. And I'll buy a gavel out of my own pocket, kind of as a tchotchke for the class winner. But it's a lot of fun. Students really get into it, where it's just an in-class tournament. We use the book for 2/3 of the semester, get through it, understand it, and then we practice it. The students have to get up and they have to argue with each other, and they don't get to choose their side. They have a little leeway on choosing their topics, but not really. They get 5 topics and they have to choose between those 5.
Outstanding. I have a question here. I'm a brand new IPDA GA. What should my students answer on when a NEG says AFF has
the AF has to have a plan text. So my responses could be a super nerdy debate theory response or practical response. Super nerdy debate response is there is not a format of debate that exists where real policy can happen in a audible, reasonable manner. Plan texts are very extensive. They're complex. And even the larger formats of debate only give you 10 minutes. Imagine Congress trying to push the American Affordable Health Care Act through in 10 minutes. So it's hard to do in any format. In IPDA, it's very difficult because you have 5 minutes. And so the idea is your plan absolutely 1,000,000% perfect? In fact, most of the time they don't run plans. And then kind of more of the lay approach is, if you have a plan, are you hitting the most important things? So if an affirmative, one side of the debate, one side of the argument, the one that proposes the argument says, well, I want to reduce the amount of CO2 emissions. Okay, that sounds fair. Technically, that's a plan. And they say we're going to have the EPA do it, and that's that. Well, then someone could come in and say, hey, well, how much is this going to cost? And that's not necessarily arguing the plan text, but that's just a general question you would ask. Like, how much is this going to cost? How much is this going to affect our economy? And those, while technically would be plan arguments, they're still general arguments. And an audience is going to understand that. And that's the important part. is that you're approaching this from something that makes sense. And so while debate is debate, IPDA really puts a premium on avoiding as much technical jargon as possible, because the lay judges aren't going to understand that. The average person isn't going to understand that. I hope that makes sense. It's a big issue. Plans are an interesting part of this, but a lot less focus.
That absolutely makes sense for this layperson, which is me. So thank you.
Right.
That wraps it up for questions. I want to thank you, Pat, for joining us today.
Yeah.
And to attendees, in the coming days, you'll receive access to the recording of this webinar. In addition, we'll supply you with Kat and Pat's email addresses if you have further questions. I encourage you to visit kendallhunt.com/events to learn more about further webinars such as this. And I hope you have a wonderful semester. Any parting words, Pat?
No, other than thank you for coming, and a little sad that Kat couldn't come. Kat put a lot of work into this. She's the one who puts the PowerPoint together. And so this isn't by any means stretch of the imagination my project. The two of us worked together on it. And then thank you to all the authors and IPDA folks who contributed to the book. Because like I said, this was a coming together of minds. This wasn't just a single project. And so hopefully you get something out of this. And again, thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a great day. Stay warm.